What used to be 50 weeks is now a few years. Back in the day, you pick up a 20 megawatt load and think, oh, great, this is good. Now it's like, can you serve a 1 gigawatt load the same amount of time or less, actually? We're cutting that timeline significantly by 40%. The growth we obtained the first full year was like 35%.
What were your fears about what might happen with the people?
The fear was
Christopher Mattila is the Director of Construction Project Management at ATC, where he leads the execution of transmission line, substation, and communication infrastructure projects. With over 17 years of experience in project management, including leadership roles at Minnesota Power and MYR Group, Chris is focused on driving efficiency, growth, and team development within the energy sector.
there needed to be some changes in the managerial layer above the PMs. There's just some minor things, but that had bubbled up because they weren't being addressed. We just knocked those out right away.
What's some advice you could give to somebody who's confronted with a challenge like that?
I think first is
Welcome to the ChoinqueCast, everybody. Today we have a special guest, someone who I've known, I believe, over 10 years, Chris Mattila. Welcome to the podcast.
thanks, Jim.
You know, in getting ready for this, I've looked back at the number of organizations I've known you've worked at least 3 of, I think, of your 5. Maybe it'd be worthwhile to share your background with your audience, at least going back to Minnesota Power and your growth progression to your current position, and perhaps stop along the way to let the audience know what we were doing when we met at any of those locations like Minnesota Power, MYR, or now ATC.
Sure, Jim. So I spent 17 years at Minnesota Power, and where I met you was in my last role. In that role, I was asked to set up a PMO to deliver first transmission projects, but then start looking, I would say, more globally or, within the enterprise to look at some of our IT projects and other things at the time, and brought in some distribution and things like that. At the time, we, I would say, went to your Leadership Excellence course out in Colorado at the time. It was pretty neat. I brought my team of supervisors that were with me at that time, and turned out great, and that was a good experience. So then I ran into you again, years later at MYR Group, actually at Great Southwestern in Alvarado, Texas. I just happened to be there for MYR Group, attending one of their sessions, safety sessions out there. I was their director of project management at the time, and I wanted to check out what they had for their OSHA 20 leadership session. And he just happened to say that, oh yeah, we got somebody providing some leadership training next door. That's different. What is it? Oh, it's Jim. I'm like, oh, I know that guy, right? So that was kind of neat, unexpected, and, in Alvarado, Texas too, right? You're not expected to see somebody,
No.
but it's a small world. And then connected with you again there. And then again, when I had the opportunity to come to ATC, and, we can discuss some of what I'm doing there after this, but an opportunity to bring somebody in to do some leadership training that was really needed for my group of project managers, but also leaders, my managerial team. And, that has worked out great, and we'll continue doing some things there. I attended your graduate course too in Tampa, which was kind of a neat
Oh,
thing.
that's right.
And it was actually at an opportune time too, with all the changes we're going through in our company and with our growth. So
Before focusing on American Transmission Company, ATC, maybe give us an idea of your growth from setting up that project management office at Minnesota Power. I think you had a couple stops along the way before getting to MYR Group. What was that progression like, the scope, or let's say you growing, say, from a manager or a technical person, turning more into a pure leader?
yeah, so at Minnesota Power, I had worked on the corporate side for a while and kind of done a lot of like internal consulting, and ended up helping on a wind park, which then I was basically asked to stay on that, to PM, I would say, the execution of that initial phase of work. But with that, I provide a lot of leadership work, I would say, by default, right? It kind of just landed on me, and took that on. And then they asked me to develop a PMO, which, kind of a little bit under the radar, right? It wasn't at the time. The company really wasn't ready for that, so I went through that process of building that up, really, and ran it for 7 years before I left. Following that, I had another leadership opportunity to restart a PMO at a cereal company.
Breakfast cereal?
Yeah. Post-consumer brands, right? And that was a culture shock, right? And coming from utilities and heavy industry in my background too, with railroads and foundries, and going into that, I would say purely R&D and marketing mode, right? Having a business degree, I could kind of jump in and figure things out, but having to jump in there was totally different. It's culture shock, and it's like, oh, this is way different than I used to it, and I'm like, well, it worked out for a while, but then I wanted to get back into energy where I would say thrive or belong, maybe. Worked for Burns & McDonnell doing, growing their T&D business in the upper Midwest, looking at other things in program management, growing that. But that, consulting, I did like it, but I kind of got away from the people side of things in a way. There wasn't as much, I would say, staff development as I really enjoy working at, right? I kind of like building up a whole group and moving the whole group, and not just individual things or just parts of things where I didn't have full responsibility, or accountability, and, came along and offered me a role there, which fit in good. It was a nice step in a director role, but ATC came along and kind of threw down the gauntlet and said, hey, we have this problem, right? We have a potential opportunity for you if you're interested. And this came from a recruiter that just out of the blue, I got a phone call and wasn't expecting it, wasn't looking even. The recruiter asked me if I'd be interested in talking with ATC. And I'm like, well, sure, I'm not looking at all, right? I made that clear, I'm not looking. But what she was talking about was interesting to me, right? It's like, putting more rigor on this group, and, you're forecasting some growth, right? And I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. And, what does that mean? And, and she's like, well, let's have a call. And I just happened to be going on vacation. I went on vacation and had a call, while I was out, and just pretty relaxed, right? I wasn't under any pressure to look for a job or anything. And my future boss started throwing down some just statements on where they were going and what some of the problems were. And I'm kind of, I've had a career of really solving problems, and providing leadership around actually those solutions and driving them forward a little bit more. And, he mapped out this whole, I would say, situation they were in. And I'm like, okay, immediately my mind starts churning. I'm like, okay, I would do this, or this, and we had a great conversation. And a couple of days later, can you come back for another interview? We talked, and they gave me an offer that I couldn't refuse, really, and an opportunity I couldn't refuse too. I could see what they needed, and just from that conversation, and met with them and was offered a job shortly thereafter. And then from there, though, I started, and we could see I started looking through their processes before I even got here. They gave me some information, and okay, well, that's all good stuff, right? It's all really, really good best practice, and they gave me a little bit of history on when they put that practice in place. And, it was when they had, essentially $200 to $300 million in a capital plan. I'm like, well, that's very doable with the amount of people they have, and not a problem. And I get here and start talking through things and looking at things with staff and with management, executive committee, and they're like, well, this is what's really coming, we think. Started digging in, and it's like, okay, and started looking at other things, and, realized that there needed to be some changes in the managerial layer above the PMs, and, had an opportunity to bring in 4 really good managers into my team from across the company, right? It wasn't a normal PM path for some of them, so they're a little bit out of their comfort zone, but boy, the traction we got was remarkable. And, I've been talking to you a little bit too, and I could see a need for some leadership training, and not sure when I'd bring that in, but, got support for that, was able to do that. But the growth we obtained, the first full year was like 35%, and then last year we had 55% over that growth period, and we're projecting out more growth going forward, which will be considerable, so we're on that path of putting in process tools, I would say tweaking process to get them more updated for the volume of work and speed and the volatility of work too, because of the change in mix, or the challenges is the mix of the work that we're seeing now with data centers, but also with constraints on outages and everything else. Material availability, there's across the board we're seeing a lot of challenges that we're addressing. And really that whole change process to get us here, though, has been a significant effort in, I would say, leadership across my team, providing that, I would say, initial vision, right? I had vision, was calling it Vision 1.0. That original Vision 1.0 was really to get us to double the plant, right? From the initial dollar amount that I knew there would be out there, and now realizing that's even going to double, right? So Vision 2.0 is in process right now. Got my leaders looking at that right now. I would say formulating their parts of the vision. I've asked them, okay, well, here's the challenge. We got up to this amount and now we're looking at doubling that. How are we going to do this? So they're each, I would say, taking their part, and really trying to formulate a good plan to go forward. And how do we, I would say, deal with that? Well, then trying to maintain what we have developed over the last couple of years here, right? We've had significant change in process and tools. We're integrating tools. We're tweaking process to gain whatever efficiency we can with automated workflows, everything like that. And, so the team is taking that and moving forward. But the key thing here was just maintaining a culture too, right? ATC over years has had a recognition kind of in the great place to work space. There's a survey that's put out there annually, and we go through that, and we've ranked pretty high. But this last year in 2025, we actually improved even more, which surprised me.
Well, hold on a second. So this crazy growth you've been describing, which doesn't sound like it's stopping.
No.
And, it sounds like you've got a background or a track record, if you will, going into an organization that may or may not have good processes already in a range of industries, not just transmission and distribution. You had that excursion to the cereal company, which you'll have to tell me some more about over a beer, I guess. That's pretty remarkable. When you're talking about growth as a leadership challenge, beyond the processes and the tools and the range of different projects you have, given all of the demand, if you will, from infrastructure type projects, I guess, whether it's solar, data center, increased higher voltage, transmission lines, all of that. What were your fears about what might happen with the people?
That's a good point too. I mean, that's one of the things I had some discussions with our human resources department when I came here. There was some, I would say, hot spots that we had to address immediately, right? There were some things that the team wasn't really happy about with their own, I would say, growth path. So there was some learning thing. There was cross-training. There was different types of projects they'd work on. So there was some pretty just administrative things that had to be taken care of. We knocked those out right away, right? But then we started addressing more of the cultural items like transparency and openness. And I would say my charge to my staff or my managers for the management team was be authentic, right? Show yourself who you are, but lead in that way. And they took that on, right? Because the fear was we had a pretty good culture, I would say, going forward. There's just some minor things, but that had bubbled up because they weren't being addressed, the previous leadership team. And I think they just didn't have the skills to do it, maybe. But the team I brought in did, and I would say they hit that out of the park, right? It's like, okay, what are the issues? Let's talk about them, and let's go through those, and, let's address all those things. What are your needs, right? And with that, and with all the change we have been, I would say, driving, the fear was we'd actually lose that cultural essence around here, right? I mean, they had been in the great place to work for maybe 11 years straight, and it's like, oh, we don't want to lose that. That means something, right?
Sure.
Because, employee retention here is great. People come here, they don't leave typically.
So let's put this in context, if you don't mind, because you're describing, I believe, at ATC, this interview process, getting an idea of the magnitude of your capital outlays, say looking to what you want to achieve or plan to achieve in this Vision 2.0 2026. That's about a 5-fold increase, right?
roughly.
Okay, I think I got the numbers right. But we shouldn't presume that means that you're growing staff by 5x.
Absolutely not. No.
Something pretty interesting is going on there. Because, I like this combination, maintaining the culture and keeping some studies that show you're improving. What's making that happen? How does somebody do that? I don't think that's a walk in the park, right? Just from an efficiency or productivity standpoint, what's changed?
Well, I think really for one, the engagement's higher than it was before, I think, with our leaders. So there's more touch points. So I think our staff PMs know that they're pretty comfortable coming to us if they have a problem. So they don't really spin on some of those things like they might have done in the past. So, we're getting, I would say, better throughput with that process. Across the board, ATC, however, we made an effort to actually look at not just the PM process, but also the other functional areas that support our capital plan, right? Engineering, construction management, real estate, supply chain. Everybody kind of got on board at the same time. So I came in and I put out this Vision 1.0 and I even made this, I would say, really ugly network diagram. I have no business doing since I'm not an IT guy, but I did it anyway. And I showed it around like, here, this is kind of what I need. And everybody looked at it. And there was one of my leaders picked it up and she brought it to, I would say, one of her more trusted IT persons that she's worked with over the years. And he came, he said, can I break this down in chunks? I'm like, absolutely. Well, all of a sudden we had this effort in the company and we call it Project Ramp Up. It's like, how do we achieve this ramp up and plan going forward? We've already been in it. We created a bunch of, I would say, internal initiatives to help us all move forward, right? And my concern was, can we all move at the same pace, right? So it's kind of a testament to ATC leadership or senior leadership to recognize that, okay, we got one key department starting to move fast. Let's get everybody else moving in the same direction. So there's been a very consistent messaging that has been going on across the board. So we have vision dates, which we've had since I've been here, talking about where we're going and what steps we're taking. So it's really a top-down effort across all areas to describe, I would say, all the teams and staff that, this is where we're going and this is why.
It's interesting.
It's a very transparent process from our leadership team.
When we were working with a large group of PMs last year, 24, if I recall correctly, I thought it was interesting that part of the custom itinerary, if you will, or agenda on the topics, it actually included strategy. I actually found that interesting. Many organizations, certainly when we're bringing in a first leadership series of workshops, we don't go that high level, if you will, to incorporate strategy. So it prompts an interesting question. I think everyone reads stuff about data centers right now, demands on infrastructure. You don't have to be an avid Wall Street Journal subscriber to be inundated with this. Spend a couple of minutes, give us a comparative context, if you will, on a type project back in the Minnesota Power days versus the complexity and the variety of things in a portfolio for a typical, say, program manager at an American Transmission Company.
That's the comparison is, it was a different time, right? To all utilities, I would say a majority of the utilities are seeing some of this impact come through right now because we're all kind of in the same boat, right? Because data centers are kind of spread across the country right now, and there's a big push to be, I would say, first, right? In that industry, right? As soon as they want to get their centers built and working to get that market share. So there's a big push on speed to the ball with these projects. So, as soon as you can get it energized, they're making money, or I think that's how their model works anyway, because they're selling that service or data processing, right? The difference, the size of the projects and the complexity of serving that type of load, right? It's much different, and which drives a lot of projects, not only, for that center, but in the periphery around it, just for voltage support, for examples, is one thing, because that load fluctuates quite a bit. But the speed at which those are going are really fast, right? So, our efforts there in some areas, we're cutting that timeline significantly by, 40% maybe, that's doing a lot of, I would say, procurement that's early. It's all these things that we cover by agreement, right, to protect the utility and the ratepayer. It's just a different environment. It's faster. It's complicated. It moves around a little bit as far as what the customer needs. But the size of it is significantly different too, right? Back in the day, you pick up a 20 megawatt load and think, oh, great, this is good. You build a line in a substation or two, and spend maybe 4 years or 5 years or whatever doing. Now it's like, can you serve a 1 gigawatt load in the same amount of time or less, actually? So really getting teams organized to go through that effort, and it's everybody end to end. It's people in procurement working, tirelessly trying to find equipment right now because the demand on that has gone up and lead times are way out there. So strategic thinking about how you execute your portfolio work, just to get the right equipment at the right time, to get the right resources, construction resources, right? Because that's another constraint is there's, linemen are not that plentiful. I mean, they're out there, but they're all busy right now, right? So how do you bring that into your footprint as a utility, right? So they're ready to go when you have those big projects, right? The other thing that's pushing a lot of the business growth right now is our large regional projects, significant in size, but looking at the labor that's needed for all those is incredible.
What's a good functional example of some of those?
For example, you might have like 200 line miles to put in. It takes a lot of linemen to put in 200 line miles over a number of years, right? So it's not like really quick work, but it takes time and it takes planning on how to execute that work over time, have the right balance of resources in your footprint to get all your work done, right? So you can't just put them all on one project and go to the next. You have to work on multiple projects at a time, and having the resource availability to do that is important, which means more planning, more strategy, more transparency. How you engage with your vendors that supply that service, right, is different, right? And I think our leadership have recognized that, and a lot of the work we're doing right now as far as process and tools helps with that transparency. It's a lot more open, a lot more entrepreneurial, and I think you've seen that in some of our PMs with their discussions around leadership. Our PMs here do, I would call it, more end-to-end project management, meaning they start early in the project, right from ideation, really. It's like, okay, somebody comes in and they have an idea, well, we need to do this, for the system. Let's develop that project before we really kick it off into a normal schedule, right? So there's a lot of project development space that our PMs work in that they normally don't see in other utilities, but we do that.
That sounds like a great advantage when you're talking about these lead times and you're talking about things like sourcing equipment. You hear how long it takes to get something like a specialty transformer or generator, especially at these new high-speed transmission lines that seem to be coming on.
Yeah, what used to be, I would say, maybe 50 weeks is now, a few years, right, when you're waiting for it. So it takes a lot of planning. Our PMs are, I would say, positioned to do that, but with that comes more, I would say, accountability on their part, more ownership, and we give that to them. It's just, the training, when we go back to the training side of it, and who are they as a leader, is pretty important. And them understanding their leadership style or their preferences or really their own philosophies as we've gone through that with them. What does it mean to the teams they're working with?
You were talking a bit ago about engagements,
Yeah,
and your internal places to work scores. What were some of the areas there that you were initially nervous, perhaps, that you might not be able to sustain it with this crazy growth, and maybe you were surprised it either maintained or improved? A couple examples of those, maybe?
Yeah, it really came down to their empowerment, right? Because they were pretty entrepreneurial before they take a job or a project, and then they would go with it. They were like given the authority to move forward and pull their teams together and do all these things, I would say, pretty independently, which is good. So there wasn't a lot of, I would say, micromanaging of them in the past. My concern with, I would say, where we're going with data and transparency, and because of the speed and I would say more interaction in the portfolio, meaning balancing a portfolio of work. Sometimes you're starting and stopping projects because something else might have a higher priority that you have to get done that doesn't have like a hard end date. I thought they would have some some issues with that. And really, I think when we're talking about our challenges and what we need to do, our new customers and service, but also maintain the grid, right? Operate reliability during those times. I think they really understood that and realized that, okay, success is being measured differently now, right? It's not so much based on how much work they can get done individual, but how we work as a team to be more agile, right? To be able to hit those, I would say, goals or needs that we have strategically. Just if we have a new customer coming in, or we have a large regional project that provides a lot of benefits to the system, trying to get that in earlier, they really embrace that, right? And how do we do that with all the constraints and from an outage and resource perspective, but now materials too, right? How do you do all of that and yet be able to execute your work effectively? And I think they got it. Once they understood all the tool design we were doing, benefits that provides, I think they were able to see how they can effectively manage their work in that space and be successful, at being, what does agile mean, or what does success mean, in that space. I think they got it, right? And so my concern about culture change and really, what their perception of that would be didn't really come, right? So I'm like, okay, this is good. They really, they get it, right? They understood, and they took that challenge, and they're working through it, and it's been great. I, applaud my managers that, help push that message down and really bring up some of the concerns too, right? So we could address those concerns because it's a two-way street, right?
Makes me glad that we brought up interdependency between different functional groups when we were in our sessions last year. Let's say someone in the audience is perhaps where you were a number of years ago, where you're just seeing this classic do more with less mandate, if you will, right? Insatiable infrastructure growth demand, because it's got to be hitting so many folks who are trying to lead in the infrastructure business. Someone who's maybe a pretty seasoned PM, maybe trying to get a project management office set up, going all the way back to like what you did at Minnesota Power.
Yeah.
What's some advice you could give to somebody who's confronted with a challenge like that? They seem to have the processes down, but maybe they're just overwhelmed. We've got a path together where you've focused on the people part, and it sounds like you've achieved dividends you weren't even expecting. So how would you advise that person?
I think first is take the time to understand what the situation is, the existing situation, and understand what obstacles there could be to getting where you need to go to that next step, but then look for opportunity as well and bring that team into that discussion. I think the whole change management effort that we've gone through, it's not just training, it's not just these things. We've been going, everything we have touched that has an impact on multiple people or just one group. We've actually gone through a change management effort of stating exactly what we're trying to achieve and why, and bring out, this is kind of what's in it for you and who else does it benefit, but also just solicit that feedback on what do you think, how do you think we can resolve this issue, right? We've had our PMs involved in most of our initiatives, where they've given input on how things work and how they want them to work, in the end, after we've done that development of that. So I think that's really key is their involvement. They need to understand what's in it for them, but then address all those issues that there might be issues that are there that have been festering, and just take care of them right away. That's your first order of business. And then really understand where are your opportunities, and to work, I would say, cross-functionally, with all those other teams that you might need help from. IT was a big one, right? So I have spent a lot of time with that group over the last 2 years, and I will be for the next probably 3, with some things we're going to be doing on our own part. And, I think just being authentic, just let them know who you are, and how you communicate, things like that, so they know what to expect.
And it's interesting. I think it's a little bit more than just the authenticity. Now, I don't want to sound really academic here, but it really sounds to me what you've just said is that ATC has project management perspective has crossed the knowing doing gap. The radical transparency, the empowerment, the knowledge sharing is an active process, not a siloed thing where one silo does their own thing and another silo does their own. There's no way you could grow or have the projects integrated early to have them have a chance of getting done on time. Let's try one more. Let's try one more thread, if you will, before we wrap this up. Because I've been to multiple of your sites. I know what part of the country that is. That Milwaukee area. What would you say are 2 or 3 of the things that make the culture of ATC special?
I would say one thing, so ATC was formed in 2001, right, as a transmission-only utility, so it was divesting the local, I would say the regional utilities. They divested their transmission infrastructure and formed ATC as a response to some, I would say, regulator requests. And with that, they had a unique opportunity to actually form themselves quickly, kind of as a business startup, right? That's kind of, I would say, how they functioned at first. But with that, they basically created almost a family environment, very inclusive group, and very, I would say, I don't know how to describe it in every word, but it's a very easy place to fit in, right? They do it now. When they hire people, it's a process here. It takes time, right? So if they want to search out the right candidate and bring them in. And then once you're in place, we do a annual process. It's almost like 360 reviews, and it's very transparent. So everybody sits in a room and talks about how each other's staff works, but then at the managerial level, and it goes up a layer, director VP level, and really the senior executive level, is everybody gets the same treatment, right? So we're all measured in the same way, and we all, I would say, take time to comment on people's development, which it's time consuming, but I think that effort's been worthwhile because I believe we develop better employees that way. So all that feedback goes back to them, and it's like, okay, this is where you're doing good. This is what we can work on. How can I help you with your core job and your reach goals? And so we go through all that, and I think that's also helps, I would say, solidify the culture that they've developed over time, where people are just open and transparent. So there's like no surprises with anybody, which is interesting. You don't see that too many places, which I really appreciate here.
No, and it's interesting because in our time in Wisconsin last year, I think I saw the tail end of that. For example, when we had the last day of that 4-day specialized, we called a foundations course, what struck me, and you saw because I made a very interesting collage picture that I posted on LinkedIn, because every group's manager was there in the room, listening to several hours of people individually reading a personal leadership philosophy. I'd never seen that happen before. You were talking about the family environment and the openness. The word that I was thinking about when you were saying that, it's an environment where people genuinely care about each other, not a plaque on the wall or something, but it's active. You can see it. This is the genuine thing. But I was struck by that. Sometimes you get a group of, very project-focused managers. They're focused on dollars. They're focused on schedule. They might not, have superior people skills.
Yeah, you reminded me about, actually, we had a retirement last week.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, guy named Doug, right? And so he retired after he had 19 years in here, and I would say a testament to really I'd say his leader, right? So Susan was his direct manager, right? And it was very emotional, right? Actually talking at his retirement party we had, and he was thanking her for her engagement, right? Taking interest and all this stuff, and
wow,
and allowing him to mentor meant so much to him this last year, because we had a APM that needed some help over the last year, right, to kind of build her up and get her ready to take on more complex work. And Doug had served as a mentor over the years anyway. Salty guy, but very personable, right? He was one of those guys that he is one of those guys that you could put in a room and he'll just talk to people, right? So very easy to work with, very easy to communicate with. Well, he was just thankful. And that was probably the most important thing to him, when he was talking to the group that was there. And he's like, that means so much to me. And thank you for letting that happen. And it was just, you could see it, very heartfelt. And, of course, it was emotional for everybody else in the room too. But
What a great indicator that things are tracking well.
yeah.
I think we've probably covered everything. Is there anything we've left out?
Okay, this has been a great journey. Kind of landing here. This might, I don't know if it's my last place I'm going to work or not, but probably. And, just looking forward to, I say, probably doing more training with you coming up with some new groups of folks coming through, also a couple new leaders coming in. So,
Okay. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to that as it warms up a little bit up there, but we'll definitely make that happen. Thank you, Chris Mattila, for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
thank you, Jim.